Hello, welcome to the channel Wise Stories. Enjoy watching.
My daughter-in-law will pay for everything, the mother-in-law bragged to her friends after taking out a loan for her jubilee. But when it came time to pay the bills, Consuela, we need to buy some food. I'll send you the list on WhatsApp. Don't forget to stop by the bank after work and take out a loan. We won't manage if you stay this stubborn, dear. People are coming next week for my birthday. Carmen had practically thrown down a challenge to her daughter-in-law. She had already called for the 10th time, reminding her that her birthday was coming up and that it was high time to hurry with the preparations. The woman wanted to celebrate her 70th with grandeur, so that everyone could have fun in a fancy restaurant. But there was just one problem: Carmen had no money for such a lavish celebration. What she had pitched in herself was only enough for renting a limousine and a bundle of balloons to decorate the hall. Yet Carmen also wanted an MC and as much Italian cuisine as possible at her party. I've lived so many years, and you mean to say I can't treat myself to an Italian restaurant on my birthday? Carmen lamented. You've already had your time, Consuela snapped back, instantly becoming enemy number one. Since you live off my son, you'd better be grateful to me for your husband and your life. I work. Doing what? A notary's secretary? Since when is serving a notary considered real work? At least I've worked. You've never worked a day in your life, Consuela retorted. My husband's father, Eduardo, supported you. That's enough. Carmen banged her fist on the table. Either you help me with the party, or it'll be the same as last year. So you've decided to be my enemy again? Consuela was outraged. It's your choice. Fine, I'll help you, the daughter-in-law finally agreed after a pause, but if you want a grand birthday, money will have to be found. Then you'll take out a loan. Don't deny it, you're a grown woman now, working, married. You won't die without money, my Pablo supports you anyway. Consuela, of course, had no intention of taking out a loan. She only agreed to make her mother-in-law leave her alone. What bothered her most was the woman's sudden outburst and yelling. Last year on her birthday, Carmen had drunk too much and got so cheerful that she gifted her daughter-in-law both her bracelet and her wedding ring. Consuela knew the story of that ring very well. Pablo had told her it had been passed down through generations of women in the family. This seemingly simple piece of jewelry was considered almost an heirloom. A man gave it to the woman he loved, his future wife. Carmen had received it from her husband, who in turn had inherited it from his father. They had spent 30 happy years together in marriage. But the day after her birthday, Carmen caused a huge scandal. She screamed that her family jewels had been stolen. Consuela suspected her mother-in-law had simply been drunk and forgotten that she herself had given away the ring. It happens people drink, then don't remember what they did. Consuela immediately reminded her mother-in-law that she had handed her several pieces of jewelry that night, but Carmen stubbornly denied it. Consuela was fed up. Her husband Pablo joined the argument. He listened to both sides and delivered his verdict. My mother never slanders people without reason. If she says she doesn't remember giving you anything, then she just forgot. Please return the jewelry, and I'll forget about your vile accusation that my mother is an alcoholic. Those words struck Consuela like lightning. She was stunned to hear them from the man she loved, but she returned both the bracelet and the ring. From that day on, Pablo appeared to Consuela in an entirely different light. The young woman increasingly noticed the difference in how her husband treated her compared to his mother. In every domestic quarrel and conflict, he always took his mother's side. Her girlfriends, who had no such problems, laughed and tried to comfort her. What did you expect? He made you his wife only 2 years ago, but he's been devoted to his mother his whole life. Of course, he loves her more than you. Just smile, help his mom, and then you'll have harmony in the family. All the more so since your beloved earns plenty of money you can put up with his mother. Consuela didn't want to tolerate her mother-in-law, but she wasn't planning on leaving Pablo either. Overall, their family life was wonderful except for the moments when his mother interfered and her husband turned into a doting son, hanging on his mother's every word. But now, after learning that her mother-in-law hadn't forgotten about the bracelet and the ring at all, that she had deliberately stirred up a scandal and accused her daughter-in-law of slander, Consuela wanted to put an end to it once and for all. Still, to avoid feeling guilty, she decided to recount the conversation to her husband. Once again, Pablo took his mother's side, saying, "Mother would never admit that she falsely accused you of anything. You're being strange, Consuela. And really, how spiteful does a person have to be to keep dwelling on some old quarrel?" Consuela decided it was time to show her mother-in-law who really ran the household. Just a little. Enough to teach a lesson to someone who was used to basking in her son's affection while bullying her daughter-in-law. The fact was, Carmen had always been used to a comfortable life. She gave the orders, others obeyed. She had never worked a day in her life. Her 3 sons were raised by her own mother, while her husband, Pablo's father, indulged her every whim. Her favorite pastime was dining out, where the bill was always paid by one of her 3 sons, or gossiping with the neighbors. That ended once the children moved to different cities and her health began to decline. But Carmen refused to lower her standard of living, or perhaps she simply couldn't anymore, and instead started partying and indulging herself even more. Now it was Pablo who supported her, bound by an unhealthy attachment to his mother. Consuela had read about such cases often. Unloved children try all their lives to earn a parent's affection, to win their love and attention. And it might have been harmless if it weren't destroying her marriage. Consuela had no intention of financing her mother-in-law's taste for luxury. Life with Pablo more and more felt like a prison. What did she really have to lose? She never went to the bank, nor did she bother with the grocery list Carmen had sent. But she replied to her mother-in-law's message saying the loan had been approved and the party was happening. As expected, Carmen was overjoyed. It was enough for her just to hear that. She partied to her heart's content. All the responsibility for the birthday preparations she promptly shifted onto her daughter-in-law. "I'll be expecting a surprise on my big day," Carmen declared. "Make sure everything is arranged so I won't have to be embarrassed. The whole family will be there." Consuela told her husband about it, but Pablo only shrugged. "Did you really take out a loan? Why? Do you also think that request was unreasonable?" Consuela dodged the question, curious about his opinion. "No," Mother asked. "You agreed, so why not? And if I had refused? I would have paid for it all myself." Consuela. "What about the fact that we're saving for a house? Mother has dreamed of celebrating her jubilee properly. I don't want to disappoint her. Hasn't she earned at least one day in a year to spend it the way she wants? If you think about it, there's nothing wrong with that. And what exactly has your mother done to deserve a palace with servants for her birthday? She raised her sons." Pablo said this as if Carmen were a venerable matriarch who had survived fire and flood. "She gave birth to me. Sometimes I feel like you're trying to split me from my own mother. Some achievement that is giving birth to 2 sons and living to her age," Consuela shot back sarcastically. "Unlike you, she thought not only of herself. You've always lived for your own pleasure, Consuela. With you, it's only about pleasure anyway, huh?" Consuela nearly blurted out, but instead of starting a massive fight, she asked, "Repaying a loan means paying thousands each month for years. Are you going to cover that?" Pablo smiled. "What do you mean by cover it? She's my mother, of course I will." Consuela smiled faintly in return. What a mama's boy her Pablo was. All the women in his family had always led the men by the nose, and still Pablo hadn't learned a thing. Now he was simply repeating his mother's words, thinking with her head. How had she not noticed this glaring difference between them before the wedding? Maybe she truly shouldn't have married him at all, and Pablo wasn't her man. But at the time, it had felt like their love would last forever. Besides, back then Pablo didn't obey his mother so blindly, didn't run after her every word. "I understand you," Consuela replied, slightly irritated. "Don't be upset," Pablo sighed. "You know how much I love you. You're a wonderful person. Even when you have nothing, you still try to take care of peace in the family. I love you. Keep it up." By peace in our family, Pablo also meant his mother. That stung. He still saw that awful woman as part of their family. Yet his words helped Consuela make a final decision and swept away all the doubts that had plagued her lately. Maybe it was time to think about divorce? Consuela never saw herself as someone who always did the right thing. In her mind, family conflicts should be resolved like this. She and her husband sit down at the kitchen table and talk. Each one says what's weighing on their heart, but without shouting or blaming. Gradually, they reach an agreement. And if they can't, they calmly file for divorce and quietly go their separate ways. At least, that's what Consuela's friends always wrote to her. It stuck in her mind that this was the right way people should live. All those family scandals that involved violence, she saw them as exceptions, not the rule. She wanted to be good, too. But whenever the topic of his mother came up, Pablo grew irritable. Once, he even threw out a threat. "I'll show you what it's like to stand against everyone all by yourself." Consuela thought about what he meant. In truth, after just a year of marriage, there wasn't much to lose unless you counted the car they had bought together. So the threat carried no weight. It only made her realize Pablo wasn't as kind and sweet as he had seemed. As for Carmen, she had always said she didn't care who her son married, as long as his wife was successful and hardworking. Consuela had often heard stories of mothers-in-law turning into monsters, tormenting their daughters-in-law for every little thing, the way they spoke, cleaned, dressed, behaved, even loved their husbands. Everyone knew, in front of your husband's mother, you had to be exactly the way she wanted you to be. But to give Carmen her due, she wasn't like that. She didn't care how Consuela cleaned or cooked. Once, she even told her neighbor Valentina, let her not clean or cook at all, as long as they have enough money for the family. But what Carmen could not ignore was anything related to money. Having been spoiled first by her husband and later by her sons, she saw her daughter-in-law as just another mouth to feed. Consuela should have seen the warning signs earlier. The first bell rang the day she met her future relative. Carmen was indifferent. She didn't probe, didn't ask questions about Consuela's life or childhood, didn't care about her at all. But when Pablo announced he wanted to marry, the air in the room grew heavy. Carmen's very first question was, and have you thought about how you'll live? Of course, Pablo laughed. I just got promoted recently. I wasn't asking you. Carmen pierced Consuela with her gaze and clarified, have you thought about whose money you'll be living on and feeding my son with? What's your job, Consuela? Will you be able to rely on yourself in case, say, of divorce? Consuela was in shock. She looked to Pablo for support, but he was just as confused. Still, that day he stood up to his mother. What a ridiculous question. I'm the man of the family. I must provide for my wife, just as father provided for you. Why are you acting this way? I just want to be sure that Consuela sees more in you than money. You know, there are so many young women nowadays who only chase after a man's income. Everyone wants to live off their husband. I love Pablo, Consuela protested, but Carmen laughed, as if she'd heard a silly joke. The conversation soon drifted to trivialities. Consuela felt awful but didn't hold it against her future mother-in-law. She excused it, thinking the woman was just worried about her son. It even seemed normal at the time. After all, her own parents also asked endless questions about Pablo. They, too, didn't want their daughter to end up with an alcoholic or a miser. The second bell rang when she and Pablo were watching a movie, coincidentally, about a mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. In the story, the wife leaves her husband, who is overly attached to his mother, and goes off with a so-called bad boy. In the end, the husband marries the woman his mother chose for him. The moral, a mother always knows best. Consuela got curious. She asked her husband what he would do if his mother told him to leave his wife and marry someone else. Pablo answered honestly. He said he would marry his mother's choice because she had given birth to him and raised him, and he only had one mother. At the time, Consuela thought Pablo was a good son and even saw a certain logic in his words. But she failed to notice one thing: a wife is supposed to be your own choice, not your mother's. She, Consuela, was unique, his conscious choice. Even if Carmen drove them apart, Pablo would never find another woman with the exact same character, worldview, or habits. No two people are identical, everyone is unique. If his mother always came first, then perhaps he should have just lived with her. There had been many such warning signs, and little by little Consuela began to think. All-consuming love gave way to reason. She realized that somewhere along the way, she and her husband had gone off track. If now, so early in their marriage, quarrels with his mother were already a regular occurrence, what would happen years down the road? Quietly, Consuela decided to gather her most precious belongings and move back in with her parents before the Jubilee. But she didn't want to tell her mother about the conflict. That would only lead to questions, and once Consuela answered them, her mother would feel obliged to step in to talk to Pablo and Carmen. That could explode into a huge family fight. Her unsuspecting husband would be furious. He certainly wouldn't pat her on the head. At best, he'd throw her belongings out that same day. At worst, Consuela couldn't even imagine what he might do. He had never laid a hand on her, never denied her money, never lost his mind, though he could shout, usually after talking to his mother. The more Carmen demanded from her son, the more often she called, the more she poisoned his mind. All that anger spilled over into blaming his wife, even if the crime was something as silly as serving homemade honey cake instead of a trendy pastry from the local patisserie, or cheap wine instead of a good one. Everything had to be done well before the Jubilee. Afterward, it would be too late. Carmen would arrive at the banquet hall, see a crowd of guests, and find no organization whatsoever. Consuela's idea, her way of teaching her mother-in-law a lesson, was simple: not to handle any of the arrangements, not to spend a dime. Carmen, who planned to throw a party entirely at someone else's expense without lifting a finger herself, would never expect that her beloved daughter-in-law would do this to her. Most likely, she would fly into a rage, scream at her son, and demand an immediate divorce. And that would be Consuela's moment to speak up. She would calmly reply that there had been no agreement whatsoever about organizing the celebration. Carmen had done the same when she gifted her jewelry, then later pretended not to remember and accused Consuela of theft. Consuela hadn't invented living off others, and she had no intention of digging through other people's dirty laundry. There was no point. The next morning began with a call from Carmen, reminding her that she wanted Italian cuisine at the Jubilee. Consuela assured her she would find someone who could cook pasta so good it would blow everyone away. Since Carmen was already too accustomed to her own specialness, she trusted her daughter-in-law without hesitation. It never even crossed her mind that organizing Italian food for nearly 100 people just 2 days before the party was impossible. To Consuela, it seemed her mother-in-law was so used to luxury that she genuinely believed the world owed her everything. The wedding was set for 2 months later. Even though the young couple seemed to have plenty of time both to prepare and to save up, it was already clear that their resources were quite limited. Consuela dreamed of the most lavish wedding in the world, but with the same passion she might as well have wished for a star from the sky or a piece of a planet. Her dream was unattainable. After all, she wasn't like his mother, demanding money from her husband. Pablo earned decently, but compared to his mother, who shamelessly collected tribute from her sons and her late husband, his earnings were like a handful of sand against a desert. It wasn't just that they couldn't afford a luxury wedding, even a simply beautiful, elegant one seemed out of reach. How could there be a carriage drawn by 3 horses, the most expensive 3-tiered cake, famous performers on stage, a flower-covered arch with colorful balloons? How could there be a sailing ship with banquet halls and silk sails? A whole hotel as a gift for their wedding night, or the chic Italian restaurant Consuela so dreamed of? They could hardly manage even a modest restaurant. Yet she longed for the frothy white lace of a voluminous bridal gown, halls adorned with white roses, lavish buffet tables, and, of course, professional dancers to stage a dazzling, romantic show. These images were so vivid before her eyes that to give them up felt like tearing out and discarding a piece of her heart. Unthinkable. But it's impossible, Consuela said, nearly in tears. Pablo only laughed, kissing her. It's impossible, you see. We'll rent a small restaurant, he said. Does the celebration matter so much? But I want a real celebration, she sobbed. It only happens once in a lifetime, don't you understand? He looked at her, beaming. It seemed the groom didn't even hear what his bride was truly saying. Her complaints struck him as charming, her pouty lips as adorable. He likely didn't take her words seriously at all. As often happens, he assumed she must see things just as he did. They had a set amount of money, wanting anything beyond that seemed to him utterly meaningless. Enchanted, he delighted in everything about his fiancée, and therefore couldn't or wouldn't think about the deeper meaning of her emotional outburst. Like most women, Consuela was practical. Deep down she knew the impossible was impossible, perhaps even more firmly than he did. But like many of her sisters, she asked her man for something seemingly unattainable because she herself saw possible ways to achieve it and longed for him to figure that out on his own. Her view of a real way to get money for the wedding was simple. Pablo had relatives. His younger brother, grandmothers, cousins didn't count. But his mother, Consuela's future mother-in-law, could, in her opinion, certainly help out. Maybe not for the most magnificent wedding imaginable, but at least for a very decent one. Maybe even a splendid one. At some point, Pablo suddenly realized his bride wasn't joking or teasing. The gentle smile froze on his face, then melted into tense bewilderment. He studied her troubled eyes, and for a fleeting moment, they looked like twins, gazing at each other in exactly the same way. But strangely, that didn't spark a feeling of kinship. Instead, they were like 2 opposing forces, weighing whether they had to clash or if things could slide by as they were, both waiting it out. The young man felt strange. Never before had he considered that his beloved, the best woman in the world, might not share his thoughts and desires. He smiled uncertainly and, just as uncertainly, offered, trying to guess if this was what she meant. We could take out a bank loan? My mother needs money too, you know, for her treatment. Pablo, my sunshine, what loan? She sighed, brushing the idea aside. Starting a family in debt, that's not for me. Pablo didn't understand. That was clear. He simply didn't understand. And Consuela was at a loss how else to hint at it. For some reason, she couldn't bring herself to say it outright. Something held her back. She turned away and sighed deeply. Her dream was slowly, inexorably fading into smoke and nothingness, and realizing that was unbearably painful. And how could anyone not love Consuela, such a ray of sunshine? And then Carmen chimed in, lecturing them. I don't understand why you need to marry at all. Just live together without signing papers. I think it's too early for you to marry. In a month I'll be 23, and the wedding's only 2 months away. Ha, what difference does it make? Mom, father was only 3 years older than me when he married you. Carmen's face grew stern, as it always did whenever her late husband was mentioned. Their marriage, for its time, had been perfectly appropriate. It was the first and only for both. They married young, raised 2 children, and dreamed of dying on the same day, but fate decided otherwise. Her husband had a weak heart. He stopped living at home, and though they were like neighbors in the end, Carmen was left alone apart from her 2 sons, who by then had grown and drifted away. And now Pablo wanted to marry. Yes, you're right, she said at last, swirling her glass. I shouldn't have spoken that way. Honestly, I'll be happy if I'm proven wrong. Wrong about what? That you're marrying too young, and that Consuela isn't right for you. Of course, if you live a long happy life together, have children and raise them well, I'll have to admit I was mistaken. Then she suddenly smiled. No, I'm joking, of course. I don't intend to meddle in your lives. You're already an adult, free to make your own mistakes. Mom, please don't. I love Consuela. I believe you do. Otherwise, you wouldn't have decided to marry. So, when is the wedding? Am I invited? Of course. Then perhaps I'll even give you a gift. Would you like a car? Pablo flinched slightly, his face tightened, even grew pale for a moment. He had to summon a little effort to say what he wanted. Mom, it would be better if you covered the cost of the restaurant. Ideally in a nice place, maybe by the waterfront. Carmen raised an eyebrow, hesitated, but held back her surprise. It's your decision, Pablo, but wouldn't it be better to have something more material? A car lasts for years, but a wedding feast leaves memories for a lifetime. As you wish, she concluded. It's your choice. Carmen had every right to be considered a successful woman. More than 10 years ago, her hobby had miraculously transformed, gained new meaning, and grown into a profitable, promising business. She had never imagined that her passion for sewing unusual, romantic, voluminous dresses would carve her a path into the vast world of serious business. For several years now, she owned a small shop that imported sweets and foods from Argentina, as well as simple dresses. But she often received custom orders from wealthy clients, neighbors, family friends online, even some minor celebrities. And just recently, a small but highly promising order had arrived from Buenos Aires, a trial run, but lucrative and full of potential. She reassured herself that her preoccupation with work was why she hadn't fully absorbed the feeling of transition from simply being a mother to soon becoming a mother-in-law. The thought came only at night before sleep, or in rare breaks between important conversations. Eventually, she stopped worrying about a problem that wasn't really a problem at all. After all, almost everyone marries sooner or later. Besides, Carmen had plenty to keep her busy. She personally handled almost every embroidery order, designed sketches, oversaw the cutting, often made the patterns herself, and spent long evenings finishing dresses. She had many skilled seamstresses and embroiderers to help her, but of course, the final word was always hers. The work gave her immense pleasure, but that didn't make it any less demanding. In fact, it was only thanks to him that Carmen managed to cope relatively easily with her husband's death and didn't give up on life. She had to keep going, had to take care of herself, and eventually, she got used to it and calmed down. A few moments before her son's wedding, Carmen hesitated, then gave in. Yes, it wouldn't hurt to help the young couple, at least financially. And why exactly should I help? She asked, turning her eyes toward the wall. The truth was, she was well off herself and more capable of helping than anyone else. I don't really like her, if I'm honest, Carmen admitted. But, Mama, Pablo protested. Mother and son sat in her elegantly decorated living room. Carmen set 2 Turkish coffee cups on a low table along with sliced fruit, small pastries, and pineapple juice. She scooped sugar into her cup and stirred only her own drink. Both were used to looking after themselves. Carmen, the mother of a grown son, looked remarkably young. Nearly 60, she could easily pass for 50, tall, fit, well-kept. It had taken great effort, endless time, and money, but the result spoke for itself. In her youth, Carmen hadn't been a beauty, but she had always had an irresistible allure. It was strange, looking at this vibrant woman, to realize she was about to become a mother-in-law. Carmen herself still struggled to grasp it. Like any mother, she first and foremost saw a son in her 23-year-old boy, not yet a man. Even though, after college, he had moved out, studied, worked, and his father had bought him a small apartment and occasionally helped with the car. That was the extent of parental support. She still had to force herself to see him as independent. "What can I do if I just don't like her?" she repeated, stirring her coffee. Her thoughts scattered like a pile of dried leaves, and she tried to gather them. "Mama, I'm not asking you to live with her. That's already something," she smiled faintly. "Eat some fruit, you love it." Pablo picked up a piece of guava and bit into it with appetite. He took his mother's objections calmly. Of course she didn't like Consuela, yet like any mother of a grown son, she feared losing his love. Stretching out his legs, he looked at the woman who had given him life with a kind of indulgent affection. He was sure that once she realized he valued her as before, she would stop fussing and soften. After all, how could she not come to love his Consuela, such a sweet, pretty girl? "Yes, you're right," Carmen finally said, swirling her glass. "I shouldn't have spoken like that. Honestly, I'll be happy if I'm proven wrong." "Wrong about what?" "That you're marrying too young, and that Consuela isn't right for you. If you live a long, happy life, raise children, I'll admit I was mistaken." She suddenly smiled. "I'm not going to interfere in your life. You're an adult now, free to make your own mistakes." The wedding, of course, wasn't as lavish as they had wished. But closer to the day, exhausted from all the preparations, Consuelo was secretly glad the protocol had been cut back. Fewer guests, less noise and glitter, and her soul felt calmer. She didn't have to watch every word and step. The dress had been sewn in a studio. Deep down, she had hoped her future mother-in-law would offer to make it with her golden hands and naturally, for free, since where would she find that kind of money? What could have been more pleasant for a bride? But Carmen hadn't suggested it, and though Consuela didn't dare raise the subject with her husband, the resentment lingered. Perhaps she hadn't realized it, but she had truly expected not love, but at least some warmth and willingness to accept her into the family. That hadn't happened. At their only meeting before the wedding, Carmen looked at her future daughter-in-law with detachment and cool politeness. Their conversation felt more like a business negotiation, which unsettled Consuela. She was used to being admired, to inspiring interest. She had expected at least feigned warmth, not such indifference. Within minutes, she decided she didn't like her mother-in-law and that they'd never get along. She was also surprised that the woman asked nothing about her work, her studies, her family. It seemed Carmen had no interest in what kind of person her almost daughter-in-law was. She asked only about the wedding plans. Then she announced she had booked a hall for the newlyweds at her favorite Italian restaurant. Food and staff would be from there as well. "You understand," she told her son, "I'll need to use this occasion for some negotiations with my sister. Oksana will be coming with her family." "Mama, I'll make sure it's as discreet as possible," Carmen reassured him. "Some of my guests will be there, but they'll be quiet, I promise." She didn't even think to ask me. Consuela fumed, though in truth, she didn't mind if some of Carmen's business clients showed up. Who knew, maybe one of them would turn out to be a decent person. So far, Pablo's family had left her with a poor impression. And so, on the morning of her wedding day, she still thought about those special guests. She jumped out of bed, ran to check her dress and veil draped on the chairs, making sure everything was in order. A hairdresser came to the house to do her hair. The bouquet arrived half an hour before the ceremony, fresh, fragrant, clearly picked that morning. The limousine pulled up at the exact time. Everything was perfect until, stepping into the crowd of guests gathered in the picturesque Riverside Park, Consuela saw her mother-in-law and realized Carmen had chosen a dress of her own making. It was stunning, a remarkable balance of strict elegance and lush grandeur. How she had achieved that harmony of opposites, who knew? The gown transformed a woman straddling the line between youth and age into a dazzling figure. There was nothing excessive in Carmen's appearance: matte fabric, a restrained shade of gray, neat hairstyle, the lightest touch of makeup, not a single bright accessory. Yet beside this masterpiece of tailoring, the bride's gown immediately paled, looked cheap. Consuela remembered they had hired a photographer for the full set of wedding pictures, including ones with the parents. She imagined herself standing beside her mother-in-law and felt irritation boil inside. Why did Carmen have to outshine the bride at her own wedding? It was indecent. She's just jealous, Consuela realized suddenly, and felt lighter. After all, her son loves me now. And I'm younger, and of course prettier. So, as she walked into the hall on Pablo's arm, imagining her mother-in-law's indignant stare, a gleeful triumph flushed her cheeks red and made her eyes sparkle with a secret fire one many mistook for the glow of love. The palace had been prepared beautifully for their arrival. Long gone were the days of dictatorship and decay. Money had been poured into renovations, and it was now a prestigious, very expensive venue for events. Even the curtains no longer looked dusty. In the grand hall, where tables, chairs, seats for the couple, and a stage for the orchestra were arranged, the florists had done their work flawlessly. It hardly mattered which flowers and garlands were real and which artificial. The effect as a whole was breathtaking. Consuela's heart skipped a beat. Dreaming of a grand, luxurious celebration, she had never truly imagined what it would look like. And now here it was before her. The decor, the interior, the staff, everything embodied genuine chic. For a fleeting moment, she even felt a surge of tenderness toward her brand new mother-in-law. Clearly, Carmen had not spared any expense. Waiters met the guests at the door, offering everyone a glass of sparkling wine. It was definitely not the cheap local champagne. Consuela couldn't identify it. She had never before tasted anything so fine. Carmen watched lovingly as Pablo glided across the dance floor in a waltz. She remembered how his father had never liked to dance, though he was perfectly capable of it. He leads her so naturally, she thought. No wonder Consuela lost her head. When her son leaned down and asked her to dance as well, she refused. He was polite and attentive, yes, but why should he want to dance with his mother? He'd find partners easily enough among the bride's young girlfriends. Everyone danced the waltz, then something fast and modern, then back to waltz again. Between dances they gathered at the tables, where thanks to the waiters food and drinks never ran out. With each glass, eyes sparkled more brightly, tongues loosened, and even strangers began chatting easily. Such is the magic of good alcohol. At Carmen's insistence, nothing stronger than cognac was served, and even that in the smallest amounts. Her conversation with her sister went surprisingly smoothly. Carmen's sister charmed everyone, a kind, elegant woman with good taste. Even Consuela liked her. It was a success, promising both an excellent contract and a chance to relax. The alcohol softened Carmen too, and even the obligation of exchanging empty phrases with the bride's mother no longer annoyed her. "You paid more attention to your mother than to me," Consuela reproached her husband the next day. Her young husband was astonished. "Where did you get that idea? You kept dancing with her and talking to her more than with me." "That's not true, Consuelita. Maybe not more, but at least as much. And it was my wedding." "What's wrong with talking to my mother?" He wondered, puzzled at what bug had bitten his wife. "But it was our wedding, not yours with her." "What nonsense are you saying?" They looked at each other in mutual offense and confusion. Pablo couldn't understand why she was upset, accused of dancing with his own mother, a woman with whom he could, by definition, have no improper interest. Would she rather he had danced with her tipsy, flirty girlfriends, batting eyes at every man in sight? And Consuela, for her part, couldn't grasp why it wasn't obvious to him that she should come first. Maybe not always in life, but on their wedding day, the day dedicated to them, and therefore to her, he should have gone out of his way to highlight her special importance. But such things are never said aloud by a well-bred, modest woman. She waited for him to figure it out himself. So she couldn't explain her complaint directly. By evening, both pretended nothing had happened. He, because he still didn't understand and preferred to dismiss the whole mysterious matter from his mind. She, because she realized she had overreacted, that his courtesy toward his mother, to keep her from being jealous, wasn't dangerous for their marriage. Best not to mention it at all. Let it go. Better not to seem like a selfish shrew. She loved him and would preserve their family. With that resolution, she went off to prepare his dinner. At work, the day passed quickly. Consuela carried out her duties almost mechanically. There were few clients, leaving her plenty of time to think. She worked at a private notary office. Maria Petra, once considered one of the best, had lately grown irritable and nervous, scolding clients until many went elsewhere. Astonishingly, she had even begun swearing at them. Consuela couldn't understand how the woman had fallen so low, but soon she realized Maria Petra, like Carmen, had begun to see herself as special above her work and had grown careless. The office was on the verge of closing. If it shut down, Consuela would lose her job, which was the last thing she wanted, especially with her mother-in-law's jubilee looming. She was more eager than ever to put Carmen in her place. How do you think one should punish a woman who shamelessly demands money both from her son and her daughter-in-law? Consuela asked her friends Nika and Olga over coffee after work. Close her emergency help bank. And if I just want to teach her a lesson? Then you can't. There's no way. Consuela fell silent. If she quarreled with her husband, she wouldn't punish Carmen, she'd give her a gift. For the only thing that woman wanted was for her son's money and love to belong solely to her. If Pablo divorced her, Carmen would be overjoyed. Their separation would feel to her like a gift from fate. She would have to think carefully. Consuela was, in truth, a very beautiful girl, strikingly so, and it surprised many that she had married such an ordinary man, Pablo, plain, unremarkable, not wealthy, not especially attractive. Consuela was a delicate blonde with big blue eyes and long fair hair. Doll-like, everyone said. Slender, pretty, charming. Pablo, by contrast, was an ordinary dark-haired, dark-eyed man, a worker with a bit of a belly, blending easily into the crowd. That evening, Pablo picked her up from work and drove her to a restaurant. "Tonight, I'm treating us," he said. "Since I can't cook to save my life, let's eat here. Pick anything you like from the menu. Today is important, Consuela." "And what's so special about today?" she asked, opening the menu. "I got promoted again. I'm now deputy director, not just department head. How was your day? Oh, and Mom will be joining us soon." "Mom?" Consuela snapped the menu shut. "Do you have something against that? You never used to drag your mother along to restaurants. I thought we'd finally have an evening just the two of us. But this isn't just a cafe, it's a restaurant. Why not share my joy with her? I'd rather go home." She almost declared then and there that she wouldn't lift a finger for the Jubilee, but instead, she muttered weakly, "I'll have gazpacho." Pablo laughed as if she'd made a silly joke. When husbands tell their wives about a promotion, wives usually smother them with kisses. Usually, when husbands announce a promotion, they don't invite their mothers to be the ones doing the hugging and kissing. "You've become so unpleasant, it's awful." Pablo giggled nastily. "I'm starting to wonder if you're plotting something." Consuela bent over the menu again, hiding her eyes. "Understand one thing. I won't tolerate evasiveness from my own wife. I've got enough problems at work." She looked up at him. He wasn't joking. She couldn't reply, though the question burned on her lips. "Is your mother more important to you than me?" Carmen arrived, spotted them, and joined their table. The tense conversation ended on its own. She showered her son with praise for his promotion, and at one point Consuela thought Carmen might burst into tears of joy. Nothing delighted her more than something to boast about to her friends. Pablo, unused to warm words from his mother, lit up and kissed her happily. Maybe she should have praised her husband too. Maybe she herself was to blame for their constant quarrels over his mother. But then again, how many warm words had he said to her? So she was right, after all. The fights were inevitable, and the fault wasn't hers. How she longed to wipe that radiant smile off her mother-in-law's face. Surely the woman was already calculating how much her son would buy for her next. Hatred drags you into its whirlpool with such force that sooner or later you end up hurting yourself. Consuela had no intention of stirring the waters or using such vile methods to achieve her goals. But Pablo's threat that he would do anything for his mother struck her deeply. She felt insulted and furious once the meaning sank in. Of course, her husband wouldn't actually move in with his mother, as he had implied, nor abandon his wife. But his reasoning made her think about a great many things. Pablo, oblivious to Consuela's mood, was happily celebrating his promotion. Carmen ordered water and a salad, and Consuela followed her example. When the waiter asked whether to split the bill, Pablo told him to count it all together. As soon as the waiter left, he began, non-stop, describing how he would outpace his colleagues in his career. Consuela had never realized this job mattered so much to him. But when Pablo finished his wine and began embracing his mother, Consuela grew uneasy. "I'm not going to organize anything for your mother, sorry," she said. Then, addressing Carmen calmly, "Please forgive me." For a few seconds both Pablo and his mother were silent. Then Pablo pressed his lips together. Clearly, neither appreciated the remark. "Do you think that's funny?" Surprisingly, Carmen came to her rescue. She forced a laugh and said, "She's just testing our reaction, that's all. I've played the same trick with my friends a few times." "Consuela, you really were joking, right?" "Yes," she sighed, unnerved by their sudden calm. "Excellent." Carmen brightened at once. Pablo blinked rapidly, trying to understand. His mother, meanwhile, grew so animated that she launched into a story about herself, filling the silence. She began recalling her life and how she had met Pablo's father. Consuela already knew that Carmen had never wanted children, that she had borne sons only for her husband's sake. Pablo was born 2 years after his elder brother Oleg, a healthy baby, despite the risk of miscarriage. Half listening, Consuela wondered what Pablo's true intention had been in bringing them both to the restaurant. Perhaps he thought it was time to discuss a shared budget for Carmen's jubilee. Of course, it would be Consuela doing all the work, not him. She could never count on Carmen's help. Pablo's high salary meant, in their world, that he was obligated to provide for his mother. It left her facing the prospect of handling everything herself. And though Pablo would never completely neglect her, the very thought of depending on his generosity directed toward his mother first terrified her. Her husband's buoyant mood quickly soured. When the salads arrived, Consuela asked for coffee, and Carmen ordered a cappuccino. Pablo refused to eat, claiming he'd lost his appetite. The evening passed to the sound of Carmen's chatter. Back home, Pablo dropped into an armchair and, pointing at his wife, said, "I don't understand what came over you to mock us like that. You can't joke that way. You know how I feel about such things." "About what things?" "You knew my remark would sting. I want to celebrate my mother's jubilee properly. Something stepped between us, and I don't understand why you haven't stopped acting like this. Like a fool, I believed you two had made peace." "I don't want to, Pablo." "Why not?" He was angry now. Should she lie, or answer honestly? He rolled his eyes, exhaled sharply. Fine. Consuela decided to speak openly. "Living with you, I don't feel protected. First, your mother always comes before me. And if I think about it, I don't want your money going to her instead of our family." Pablo gestured toward the sofa. "Then let's sit and talk. I'll listen carefully. If it's about money, consider it solved. Do you really think you'll have to live on your salary alone? Do you take me for some miserly invalid, incapable of supporting my wife and myself?" Obediently, Consuela went into the kitchen and sat down. A thought crossed her mind. Maybe this was how it should be. Maybe she shouldn't deceive her mother-in-law about the party. Maybe she shouldn't do it behind their backs. Maybe she should just tell Pablo now that all she wanted was freedom. "Let's be honest," she said, adjusting her hair. "Right now we don't live like a family. Yes, you do a lot, but it's for your mother. You pay her utility bills, you buy her expensive gifts, and meanwhile, what's wrong with that? A man provides for the household, but his mother is family too." Consuela shook her head. "I don't want to live like this. Why should I? I'm left buying only what I can afford, as if I didn't have a husband. I spend my salary on our home. Last month, the door handle broke, and the washing machine too. You didn't give me a cent for the repairman. I had to pay. But your mother, you never stopped sending her money for beauty salons. I remember it all." She paused, trying to collect herself. This conversation had started by accident. "If you gave me the freedom not to think about your mother," she said, pulling out of her thoughts, "then I wouldn't have to complain about her to you." "Everyone must look after themselves," Pablo replied. "You shouldn't be fighting with her but working to improve your relationship. When I told you I was in the hospital, do you remember your first question? You asked where your mother was and why she wasn't answering her phone." "Yes, because she always answers her phone." He truly didn't understand. "It's not my fault she asks her sons for money. If your brother lived closer, he'd be dragged into it too. And it's not my fault you ended up in the hospital, Consuela. Not once did I reproach you. Do you know why? Because I always watch over you, I worry about you. I could panic, lose my head, but why? You're responsible. I know that. And if you were right about the jewelry incident, why didn't you prove it? Why didn't you take my mother to court when she accused you of theft? Because that would be insane. Stop reproaching me for everything. Do you know what I saw in that hospital? A man, gravely ill, and his wife by his side. She cared for him because she loved him madly. That's the difference. Even in sickness, he had her love, while you only cared where your mother was. I can't even come home in peace anymore. I keep imagining her sitting here again. You're just foolish. That man's wife behaved normally. You'd do the same if it were me." Consuela opened her mouth, then shut it. Pointless to argue. Pablo clenched his jaw, grinding his teeth furious, but holding back. "Fine," Consuela said, striving for calm. "In that case, we're not right for each other. There's no point in more quarrels. Let's separate. If you want, Consuela, I'll give you as much money as I give my mother. Don't be afraid." He still didn't grasp the true reason for the conflict. "No, I want peace. I don't need your money," she repeated. "So you're furious because of my mother?" "Among other things," she admitted. "I don't understand why you fully provide for her while I spend nearly all my salary running our household. Yes, darling, don't widen your eyes. I buy toilet paper, dish soap, napkins, groceries, everything. To you it's trifles, but for me it's a big part of my pay. What you give for bread and milk doesn't cover the household. My mother is alone now. After father died, she's struggled. Who, if not me, should help her? Your jealousy and bitterness toward her make no sense. I don't object to helping your mother, but not like this. Not when I have to borrow from my friends while you send half your salary to her. Then maybe we really should review our expenses. I thought what I gave was enough. It's not my fault you kept silent. I will complain, yes. And you'd better take care, darling. Rage made her tremble. Then return to my mother the gift she gave you, the jewelry, the perfumes, the money. Or else what? He himself didn't know what he'd do if she refused. I'm going to my room, Consuela said at last. When we've cooled down, we'll talk again. We won't divide anything. Everything can stay with your mommy. Otherwise, you and your mommy will end up with a heart attack. We don't need that, do we? Consuela left the room, leaving her husband alone. She already knew he wouldn't understand her complaints, but she was certain he would come up with something unpleasant and humiliating. Consuela loved Pablo very much, but his actions and thoughts no longer satisfied her. She heard the front door slam. Pablo had gone out. She didn't rush to pack her things, deciding instead to calm down. If a million other women before her had managed to survive quarrels with husbands and mothers-in-law, then so could she. She glanced at the clock. Already 11:30 at night. Where was Pablo? Her mind ran in circles, trying to guess where he could be. Another hour passed. She calmed herself by deciding to prepare breakfast in advance. The darkness outside told her Pablo must have decided to spend the night at his parents' house. Their family cottage had 5 rooms, one always reserved for guests. As she replayed their argument, Consuela came to a bleak conclusion. However kind and successful her husband might be at work and private life, he was weak and foolish. Nothing would change until he stopped listening to his mother, and even that might not be enough. His mother had drilled into his head that all wives were parasites. The less money a man spent on his family, the stronger his marriage. Yet she herself had always taken all of her husband's salary and that of her elder son before his marriage, managing the money as she pleased. But of course, that was different. Her thoughts were interrupted by a phone call. Seeing Pablo's name on the screen, Consuela at first didn't want to answer. Then she decided to hear what he had to say. Her husband's unpleasant voice came through the speaker, shouting incoherent songs, asking whether she was really at home and not with a lover. Then he spat out something vile, that he would stay at a friend's house, drink, and rejoice that he had been mistaken about such a disgusting wife as Consuela. Those words wiped away all memory of their earlier quarrels. Suddenly he became utterly repulsive to her. He hung up, leaving her bewildered. Unsure what to do, she called her mother-in-law, assuming Carmen might know. Fear wasn't what she felt, only disgust at her husband's drunken voice. In such moments it was hard to think clearly. If only he had explained where he was and what he was doing instead of cutting the call, she might not have been so angry. Carmen didn't answer right away, making her more anxious. Finally, her irritated voice snapped. "Are you crazy, calling at this hour? I'm already asleep. Do you know where Pablo is? He hasn't checked in." "What? He went out somewhere." Carmen sounded even more displeased. "He just called me, completely drunk, with friends." Consuela hesitated, unsure whether to reveal the truth. "You think it's a mistress?" Carmen cut into her thoughts. "Well, if it is, then fine. He called, laughing, cursing, singing. Told me he'd stay nearby at some friend's house." For a moment Carmen was silent. Consuela heard her switch off the TV. "Did he say where?" "No, he hung up." Consuela held her breath. "Then it's nothing. He's playing a prank on you. Don't pay attention. I'll call him myself and ask. He wouldn't drive drunk. If he called from a friend's, then he's been drinking. Did you two quarrel?" "We did." "And you went too far?" "I told him I'm tired of being in a relationship of 3 people. Consuela bit her tongue. "Why?" Carmen pressed. "Not enough money for you? Why must everything with you come down to money?" "I don't mean it like that. But why do you blackmail him with me, Consuela? What's the aim? You want money?" "I'm not blackmailing anyone." The conversation slid into another track. "Oh, come on. I can see it clearly. I used to blackmail my husband the same way, to push him away from his mother. She was a monster. I'm not like that. You think I don't see what's going on?" "Carmen, I am not you, and I won't play games. With your son, nothing will work out as long as you're in the middle. I don't like the way he treats me. And if Pablo keeps calling me drunk like this, it'll only be worse for him." "Then why did you live with him for a year and keep silent?" "I was in love. I excused it. Why do you care so much?" "I don't," Carmen snorted. "If you divorce, so be it. I suppose that means you won't be organizing my jubilee. And you never planned to, anyway." Consuela ended the call. What was wrong with these people? She told her mother-in-law about divorce, and Carmen only talked about herself. Yet strangely, after their talk, Consuela felt lighter. Still, the whole situation left her unsettled. If a husband spent the night out, shouldn't he at least give his wife an address, or a phone number, or the name of the friend? His mother had understood at once that Pablo was with a friend, which meant she knew who it was. It felt like he was either trying to get back at her, or simply running away. If so, then divorce was the only right decision. And all because of Carmen, who poisoned their marriage with her venom. Consuela knew it wasn't fair to blame only one person in a quarrel, yet she saw no fault in herself. What she did see was Carmen's hand in every single conflict. If Pablo had listened less to his mother and more to his own mind, there would never have been such petty disputes. Back when they were just dating, everything had been like a fairy tale. Pablo courted her, brought flowers, took her to cafes and cinemas, gave her gifts. She, in turn, tried to please him, cooking for him, buying expensive presents. He had been amazed to learn she could cook. "I've never met a girl who can cook so well at 18. I thought modern girls didn't cook at all." Such simple things delighted him so much that he confessed his love that very day. Back then, Consuela felt truly in love, not worn down, as she did now. It all went wrong when Carmen began interfering with her poisonous advice. Consuela had heard her with her own ears. "She married you for money. Don't believe me? Test her. Within a year she'll pack her bags and divorce you, and you'll be paying her for life." Those words were both insulting and infuriating. But Consuela had thought, if she started defending herself, she would look exactly like the greedy schemer Carmen accused her of being. After all, someone with nothing to hide should simply shrug such things off. But Pablo had listened to his mother, and that's when it began. First small things, then bigger. Consuela now realized her mistake. She should have spoken up then, instead of staying silent. After the incident with the jewelry, after the accusations of fraud following the party, after Pablo's blind agreement with his mother, she should have left. That was exactly what Carmen wanted, to break them apart. There were more schemes from her mother-in-law after that, though eventually they grew tiresome. At one point Carmen even declared, "Either you live by our rules, or you leave." Losing to her mother-in-law in the battle for her husband would have been humiliating, and she didn't want to give up the man who had once made her heart race. There was still hope he would change, become the man he used to be. But her blind submission to him and to his mother had the opposite effect. The more yielding Consuela became, the bolder Pablo grew. The worst part was that Consuela herself was beginning to resemble Carmen. Her decision to pick a fight at the Jubilee came from accumulated grievances. Someone who knew their worth would never stoop to the level of a spiteful teenager. But maybe revenge was only a way to assert herself, to show her mother-in-law her place and make her understand that Consuela, too, must be respected. She looked at her packed things. Her eyes stung, and tears rolled down her cheeks. Consuela called her mother-in-law again. She wanted to speak her mind. "Do you know the real reasons for the quarrels between your son and me? I'm not interested." "Then listen anyway. If you hadn't interfered in our lives, nothing would have happened. You turn him against me every single day. Do you enjoy saying nasty things, or are you just so afraid that he spends money to support his family?" Carmen should have snapped back with something sharp or cruel, but instead she calmly said, "When you divorce, then you'll see everything." Consuela threw the phone onto the couch. Crying out loud, she felt foolish and pathetic. But with the tears, some of the pain left her body. Her husband returned in the morning. He was safe, but he reeked of alcohol, looking worn out and exhausted. "You didn't even try to look for me," he accused. "Any other woman would have called every hospital and morgue. Maybe my mother's right, there's no love coming from you. You just think about yourself and about money. After my call, you probably spent the whole night calculating how much you'd get in a divorce, how you'd fight for part of my estate." Consuela looked at him with eyes swollen from tears. Her night had been sleepless too. Feeling drained, she had no strength left to argue. He hadn't understood anything, and she hadn't managed to make him see the true reasons behind her decision. She called a taxi, gathered her belongings, and went to her mother's house, trying not to look back. At her mother's, she slowly came to her senses. The preparations for her mother-in-law's jubilee were already in full swing. Yet Consuela was tormented by doubts about her decision. Sometimes she thought it was her fault that her love story with Pablo had almost ended because of his mother. If she hadn't insisted on helping with the celebration, maybe they would still be happy. Consuela's mother only fueled the fire. Shaking her head, Victoria pitied her daughter. But pity was the last thing she needed. What she craved was support, the certainty that she had done the right thing and had no other choice. The private notary's office where Consuela had worked shut down. She quickly found a new job in social services. The salary was smaller, the workload heavier. She had no time or energy left to mourn a failed marriage. Still, sometimes she caught herself thinking that life with Pablo hadn't been so bad. The thought clawed at her heart. At times she looked through their photos together. Frozen moments of happiness made her feel she had given up too easily. Soon after, anger would rise in her, not at Pablo, but at her mother-in-law. She hated Carmen. So when Carmen called and suggested meeting, her first impulse was to refuse and block her number. But the feeling of unfinished business and inner turmoil made her agree. They met in a cafe near Consuela's workplace. Not wanting Carmen to later report to Pablo about her spending, Consuela ordered only a cup of tea. She expected to see Carmen in high spirits, imagining how it would play out, the mother-in-law spotting her at the table, waving cheerfully, then sitting down and babbling on about how their lives had improved since the divorce. She'd look down at Consuela, shaking her head, asking smugly how she was doing without a husband, and Consuela would have nothing to answer. But Carmen approached the table calmly. She looked worn out, tired, her face pale and gray. "I want to talk to you, though you already know that," she began. Her tone carried no contempt, no triumph. On the contrary, she seemed to be going through a difficult time herself. "About what?" "I want you to stop being angry with me and stop fighting with Pablo," she said, stunning Consuela. "Why?" Carmen sighed heavily and averted her eyes. "Because it hurts him when you fight. He stopped working, just sits at home, doesn't talk to anyone. His business could end in disaster. Weren't you the one who wanted us to divorce? Weren't you the one turning him against me?" Carmen lifted her gaze. "Do you really think your quarrels are because of me? Who else, then?" Her mother-in-law answered almost immediately, and what she said forced Consuela to rethink many things. "You and Pablo don't fight because of me. Yes, maybe I went too far sometimes, said things, did things, but the choice to act on them was always his. Now he's deeply depressed. He never expected you, with all your quirks, to go this far. My son loves you. All he wanted was to know if you loved him. The money issues, his stupid jokes, don't take them as malice. See them as tests. He wanted to be sure money wasn't what mattered to you. Believe me, he truly loves you." It all sounded like nonsense. At first Consuela listened carefully, but the more Carmen spoke, the more convinced she became of her guilt in all their quarrels. Carmen had always lived at someone else's expense and was terrified of being left without money. Pablo had believed her provocations, thinking with his mother's head instead of his own. And no matter how much he suffered now, Consuela knew that within a week or two he would return to work and life would go on. Carmen would keep demanding money and help with the jubilee, and Pablo would keep indulging her. But in one thing Carmen was absolutely right. Whatever she said to her son, the final decision was always his. Nothing prevented him from standing up for his wife. But Pablo continued to listen to his greedy mother as though hers was the only voice allowed in his life. His material success and lifestyle were dictated entirely by her demands. He deprived himself of personal pleasures and expenses just to satisfy her endless greed. Until he realized that this unhealthy dependence on his mother's selfishness was stunting his own growth and filling his life with a constant struggle for her approval, he would never be happy. The chasm was so obvious now that Consuela marveled at how blind she had been. They say love is blind, and her childish thoughts of revenge against Carmen, who was merely a catalyst in their marriage's chemical reaction, suddenly seemed foolish and naive. Consuela finished her tea and silently listened until Carmen was done. Even now, her mother-in-law was trying to get away with living at someone else's expense. From her story, Consuela understood that Carmen cared less about her son's suffering than about losing access to his wallet. She couldn't bear the thought that he might refuse to fund her celebration and feared the consequences. Consuela refused her request, explaining that if Pablo wanted her to prepare the jubilee, he could call and ask himself instead of letting his pride get in the way. That evening, walking home, Consuela felt light and calm. She had done the right thing. She hadn't realized it at first, but she had finally told her mother-in-law no. Carmen failed to organize a lavish jubilee in such a short time. Pablo, meanwhile, became absorbed in a new business idea, website development, and ignored his mother's pleas for money. He cared little for material things, and in his own way, he was processing the quarrel with his wife. At first, he blamed everything on his failed prank. Later, he turned on his mother, accusing her of bad advice. He closed himself off from both women, never truly understanding anything. Sometime later, Pablo and Consuela had a daughter, Maria. The newborn, though from happiness, managed to reconcile mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, even though Carmen still offered harmful advice. But now, Consuela was wiser and shrewder, and eventually she won the battle for her husband's heart, bending him to her will. 3 years later, they had a son, Victor, and Pablo was promoted for the 4th time after the director's resignation. Pablo became the new head. Consuela, too, had advanced, no longer just a secretary at the notary's office, she became head of a department in social services, all while giving birth to their 3rd child, Alexander, 3 years later. Looking back, the entire story seemed absurd to her. Consuela often wondered how she could have allowed herself to be treated that way. But she understood the most important thing: life cannot be built on quarrels and resentments. It must be built on mutual support and respect.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.